Hello and welcome to another exciting, informative, educative episode of Africa Update, reaching you from Trust TV in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And this week on the program, we're doing a review of happenings on our great continent, Africa, in the year 2024. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's the Africa Update on Trust TV, and I'm your host, Chiamaka Mwafo. Now, as I said earlier, this week we're going to be doing a review of some of the happenings, maybe major, maybe minor, that took place in our continent, our great, beautiful black continent, Africa, in the year 2024. So, as you know, there were some key happenings. We'll just do a run over of some of them. There were political transitions and elections. We have Namibia, Ghana, Zimbabwe, and even South Africa had its elections this year. Then we have regional security, Sahel region, the Sudan, Mozambique. Something is happening over there. Economic development. We saw what happened in Kenya with the protests, and even in our great country, Nigeria, with the protests as well, and South Africa with the persistent power outages. Climate and environmental issues. We had severe weather events. Really, a lot of floodings happened in East Africa and the Horn of Africa, where droughts actually took place there. Now, of course, the COP29 that was happened as well. African leaders went there to try to get funding, and this year's COP was named the climate finance, or finance climate. Of course, social movements and milestones, where we see, of course, in Namibia, where the first female president was elected, and youth movements across several countries in Senegal and Algeria, where they're highlighting frustrations over unemployment, governance, and socioeconomic inequality. These are the things that happen. And I think these things happen mostly in most part of the African continent. People are really tired of what's happening. And of course, regional cooperation. We have the African Union continue to push for the free trade under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and the ECOWAS bloc has been hit with this new formation of the AES, that is the Alliance of the Sahel states. Oh well, that's a lot to unpack in this episode, and of course I have someone to do justice to it with me in the studio, Ambassador Haruna Wakani, the former diplomat, but likes to be called a documentalist, so we'll just stick to the documentalist. Thank you so much for joining us today on Africa Update. So now let's start with let's go recent and maybe go all the way back. The elections that just happened recently, generally the elections, the Namibia elections, seeing the first female president in the country. The Ghana elections, seeing former president come back. And then, of course, we go to Zimbabwe, where Nangwawa has won again, or the people are saying no. We see Mozambique's election too, which has brought about problems. South Africa, they had to form an alliance. There's so much. So what's your take on the issue so far?
Okay, thank you, viewers, and thank you for having me. Africa indeed has been, can we say, in turmoil in the last 1 year or so, because of events that have come to shape what has been happening here. We would say is a year of so many elections, and so many elections with drama, one would say, because it has brought changes that have never been expected. The last being the Mozambique election and Namibia. You can see differences in what citizens feel, because there have been parties that have remained in power for so long on the continent, and these parties are generally like entitlement parties, I would say. They believe because they fought for independence from the colonial masters, and the leaders were those who went to the trenches or bush or the wild to fight for independence. Therefore, they are entitled to remain in power almost forever, transiting more or less from a democracy supposedly to a monarchy, sort of. We have people like Uganda, that you can't even talk of any election. Whatever election you are saying would have been just like a rubber stamp, because the man is saying he cannot go to the bush, fought for a war, and hand over power just to anybody. Those are the kind of situations. So the Frelimo, for instance, you will see that they too are contesting the result of the election because they never believed there was any good reason on earth for them to lose power. Because they fought for independence, they got the independence, and so it's an entitlement. They should remain in office literally forever. I think these are the major situations. It's not just the elections themselves, but the underpinning reasons or development that we are seeing. You could clearly see that Africa is maturing in some respect. We can easily say so. It's maturing in the sense that citizens are beginning to ask questions. Okay, yes, you got independence for us, but now you have had your time to govern this country, and the resources have not been deployed the way we want. There is no visible signs of development. Socially, we are not developed. Infrastructurally, nothing much is happening on the continent, and resources have been plundered as it used to be. So what is the essence of the democracy we are practicing? That's why people are questioning all this. Now, if people have an opportunity, you could see the woman has become president, though it's still under contestations, but we hope the courts will be able to resolve those matters, and then we will have a first woman president in that country, and in fact a very big plus for the gender movement across Africa. Now, the other countries, Namibia, almost the same thing. You had all those things. Botswana too, which did the election quite smoothly, no issues, and the new government came in.
Same Southern Africa.
Yes. So one would say generally the entire region of Southern Africa, I think is almost like a revolution, a democratic revolution, let's say, because things have been changing. Even in South Africa itself, as a major player in that region, you could see what the context of that election was like. For the first time, ANC felt very threatened. She couldn't just have the kind of expected
leeway and
good. They had to negotiate with other parties that they were not seeing eye to eye to say, okay, we need to share power because not one single party can now form the government. Now, the parliament is already there with a lot of issues. Challenges are there. The president is facing a lot of things that needs to be done, and he has to really navigate within the context of all those plural parties to see what can be done and cannot be done. Now, this is a thrust that we can see some other countries waiting to have elections, let's say next year.
Yeah, there's quite a number of elections next year.
Very
actually.
good. These are good signs to show that, yes, things are happening. Ghana is also a good example of change that must come. Because now, I will tell you, Ghana is a combination of bad policies, seemingly bad governance, and the effects, the negative effects of IMF and World Bank on the African continent. Because when the bank dictates to African leaders how they should govern, namely devalue your currency, impose new taxes, and open up, so-called open up to new investors and the rest of them, and people take them for granted or on face value, you end up with some of these things. Now you can see a ruling government or party in office was removed, and a former president is now back in Ghana, and you can see also that the elections went so smoothly that there was no need to wait for the umpire to declare the result. People themselves declared the result, including the contestants, accepting that yes, truly, this election is okay. We accept the result as it were, irrespective of the final counts or whatsoever. So these are clear indications of things that our leaders need to pay attention They need to pay attention to a lot of things that are happening. And we hope things will work out. Now also, I think this year is ending with a bad outing for France on the continent. Good, because now France has effectively been kicked out.
You say effectively?
Yes.
Why effectively?
Well, effectively in the sense that France is no longer a colonial master. France is no longer...
But if you've given independence, how do you still retain...
No, but that was it. That was what it was. Independence was granted largely in the 1960s. But France has remained dominant in all the economies, including management of currency, central bank, Ministry of Finance, and agreements that you cannot even sign with another country, third country, freely. So exploitation of natural resources of those countries and exclusive military agreements that you cannot purchase anything, not even a bullet from any other country except France. Today, we have seen what has happened. Beginning with the last being Gabon, giving notice to France, Senegal saying France, yes, I think time has come, you need to go. The AES, those ones have settled the matter. And Chad, finally. Chad, of all countries in Africa, one would think the instruction or directive or insistence that France must dismantle its military bases in Chad and leave the country. Believe you me, it's a milestone for us in Africa because now it's reverberating all over the place. Unfortunately, the only negative side of it to us is Nigeria. That it is now that we are also moving forward to sign all kinds of agreements with France. Very, very unfortunate because for whatever it is, France can never be a true friend of Nigeria. I think that must be made very, very clear.
So I take it that you have some ideas on the recent trips our president made and the agreements he signed with some of these countries.
Sure. First and foremost, we were never a French colony, and therefore we have very little to do with France. Second, France has never hidden the fact that it calls us the enemy or neighbor you cannot avoid in its foreign policy. Official foreign policy position is Nigeria is the neighbor she cannot avoid. We don't share common boundaries with France physically, but because of the position of the sub-region in Africa, it has always treated Nigeria with distrust. Such that if our foreign affairs were to maintain its corporate memory, we must deal with France with a lot of skepticism.
Long spoon.
Yes, very, very long spoon, because from right now, all the skirmishes you see, the Boko Haram, the other bandits and what have you, it is traceable to the role of France in the sub-region. France is a state actor that we cannot deny anymore. She can't deny it.
Do we have proof to this?
There are plenty of proofs out there in the public domain to prove that, yes, France is responsible. You know, the main reason why the Chadian president asked France to dismantle its military base and leave the country has to do with its involvement with Boko Haram in Chad.
Okay.
Good.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the Republic of France has involvement with terrorists.
Sure.
How do we prove this? Because we can't make these accusations without proof to back them.
No, but you know, like I said, in the public domain, it is there because in these countries there have been individuals that have been implicated in gun running and very close to the government of France, including enjoying diplomatic cover. And these are people that even ordinary citizens who had good reasons to interact with these individuals have been very, very suspicious of their activities in Africa, linking from Algeria, Morocco, Libya, down to Niger, Mali, and the rest of them. Now, Chad has clearly shown that, look, we have credible evidence to show that France is actually behind some of these terrorist activities in the continent, and we are very unhappy. Now, recently we can also see that the United Nations finally has concluded that France is actually greatly involved in the Sudan crisis, funding through UAE because of its national interest. And the war, you can imagine how a whole country has been devastated. Over 2 million people displaced, killed, and maimed, and livelihoods totally destroyed because of one national interest somewhere. So a country like Gabon equally would have been like nobody. But now they are speaking, they are angry, they are willing to say, France, you must leave. The development in Senegal, where the young man who has been elected president clearly came out and said, France must also leave. You know, it's very strategic because within the West African bloc, the central bank that France uses to manage Africa, West Africa, is located in Senegal. And if France is asked to leave, which means the entire relationship between Senegal as a country and France as also a country is affected. If that happens, the implication will be that France will have to relocate the central bank for West Africa elsewhere because now she is no longer...
Okay. I'm sorry, Ambassador. When you say the central bank for West Africa, why would France have a central bank for West Africa?
Okay, wonderful. That's very, very interesting. You know, despite independence, France has refused these colonial entities, all the French-speaking countries, minus Guinea, still maintain a single central bank and run by France, which is located in Dakar. None of these countries have a central bank of its own up to now. So these were some of the reasons why the AES states said clearly they can no longer tolerate this. We cannot be independent and we cannot determine our currency. We don't have a central bank. We don't even have a Ministry of Finance.
Okay. We will go into the AES situation, that's a Sahel state situation, when we come back from this very short break. Do stay with us.
Thank you.
Welcome back. You're still on to Africa Update on Trust TV. Now we've been taking a look, as we said, a review of what's happening on the African continent, and we'll be talking elections. Somehow we delved into the role of France in Africa. But now we're going to be moving away to security and conflicts, still around that area. And we're looking at the Sahel region, the AES, that's the Alliance of the Sahel States. They just formed, and some of these countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, were part of the ECOWAS. And they left us to go and form their own states. Now, you were talking about the AES, but away from the France situation, let's hone it down to them. They left ECOWAS.
Yeah.
What were the reasons for leaving ECOWAS? And now that they formed themselves, what are we hoping to see from them, really? And this decision that they took, is it really the best decision for them?
Okay, by July, when some of these coups occurred within the AES, it became difficult for ECOWAS to accept these countries within the context of the protocol provisions of the democracy and good governance of ECOWAS, that no country under military rule is allowed to partake in the affairs of ECOWAS. And so because of that, sanctions were placed on these countries. Some of the sanctions became too punitive, too devastating.
Because cutting off light to Nigeria or something.
Precisely. Nigeria disconnecting light, even though the light has nothing to do with ECOWAS. We have said this before, but out of lack of sufficient knowledge, I would say, and information, Nigeria precipitately took that decision, which was very, very wrong. And apologies were offered later to these countries, but it became too late.
Damage had been done.
Too small. And now these countries have been forced to take those decisions. The threat also of military invasion of these countries by ECOWAS was quite catastrophic, because you wouldn't expect anybody, a domestic fight of that nature, you escalate it to the point where you are asking the chiefs of defense staff to quickly put up a force to go and invade one of you. And it became very difficult for these countries to accept those kind of things. So it gave them an essence or reason for them to gang up, to say, wait, we need to defend each other, should in case ECOWAS goes ahead with the threat to invade any of these countries. Now, they have pulled out. First, it looked like a child's play. And over time, it became obvious that these people meant business. And you could see from their protocol, from their communique of various meetings, they were very deep and comprehensive in their approach to this matter. Now,
it was not a small decision or light decision they took.
Not at all. It's very, very comprehensive. And I recall very, very well here on this television, in that July, I did say this sanction that ECOWAS was imposing was a great mistake, which might be very costly, and it turned out to be very costly indeed, because now ECOWAS is the loser in this respect, because for you to lose 3 member states at once, and now Senegal has joined.
Senegal is leaving ECOWAS as
well. Senegal eventually has not left, but from the body language, you could see that the country is rethinking its membership of ECOWAS. Don't forget, the president of Senegal, immediately he was elected, was one of the envoys appointed by the chairman of ECOWAS, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu, to go and plead with these young people to come back. Don't go, please. Because they are of age, the same, and at
age bracket.
Good. Now, the man went round, and the AES people were very, very vehement that they indeed intend to leave even the African Union.
But you're on the African continent. Why make that decision?
Yeah, well, of course, if too much pressure...
British left the EU, so...
Yes, if too much pressure was coming from some of these blocs, the intention would have been to have independence. Now, these countries are, I think, better today, because when they were within the bloc, nothing much was happening. ECOWAS, yes, managed to organize like a UN peacekeeping mission in Mali in particular, but that also did not make any impact, because even though these peacekeeping missions were there, attacks by the terrorists and what have you were still ongoing pervasively. And so sometimes you begin to ask the question, you have a military base, you have a UN peacekeeping mission, you have all sorts of meetings taking place, resources being wasted, and yet the conflicts were still on. Military formations were being attacked by terrorists. So you can't explain some of these things. And therefore, you ended up with a situation where these people had very good justification for leaving ECOWAS, which they left. Today, you ask the question whether that decision is right. I can tell you it is, because there may not be any vacuum. They've left ECOWAS. They've asked France to leave. France reluctantly left, particularly in the case of Niger, you could see. They were asking the question that the new military government in Niamey had no right to ask the ambassador of France to leave that country. I mean, it's never anywhere that you are host. You are saying you don't recognize your host. You dictate to your host that you cannot leave the country. Your diplomatic mission, I mean, practically impossible. So eventually, France ambassador left in a hurry. And the next stop was Chad, just nearby, because of the same military bases that they had. Today, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali feel very free to take decisions on their own. They are realizing more income from their natural resources, particularly uranium and some other minerals, gold, and the rest of them. They have decisions to take on their own, not whatsoever. They have restored their sovereignty, which is very, very vital, because countries exist without true sovereignty. You are not yet a country. Today, these countries can exercise that sovereignty. Now, what they want, perhaps, will be to pull out from the safer zone, which is quite the next issue that they are still looking at how to do that, because it has economic implications that are beyond the surface. And that's why it's taking them a little longer to do so, because it means now they have to set up a central bank that can manage this. They have to introduce a new currency, which they have designed and did. They have to manage those things. And France is also still in the wings trying to sabotage some of these things. So they are not unmindful of all those things, including attempted coups in those countries, just to tell you how desperate France is. Now, all this sum up to the fact that this is like a coming of maturity for these countries within the fold of the Francophone. So we hope they will begin to realize better the new relationship they are also fostering with Russia, with Turkey, China, and the rest of them.
Okay, so let's move over to Sudan. This issue started last year, and by now I'm really hoping, just the way the Russian-Ukraine issue started a few years ago, that things should be winding down. There should be some sort of impasse, some sort of conflict resolution. Let's find a way forward. But it seems like in Sudan, and though Russia is not a concern in Russia as well, the issue is not about to end anytime soon. How do we resolve this Sudan conflict?
Sudan presents to us on the continent a very difficult scenario, because here is a country that is supposed to be homogeneous, ethnically speaking. Unfortunately, that has not been. And a country that Africa looked forward to being one of the key states on the continent. Unfortunately, as soon as South Sudan left, what remained of the main Sudan could not also find peace. So there are parts of the Sudan that are pulling in tangential the directions as to what should happen, because the rebels, as they are called, or the RSF, have suddenly decided that they must challenge the central government. And the theory always has been, after the reign of every dictator, countries tend to go apart, which is very dangerous. And that's why we need to understand that a lot of things are not right with the Sudan. Al-Bashir has been there in power for so long, and now upon his departure, the country can no longer hold itself together. And the fighting, yes, you are right, doesn't seem like it will end soon, because outside influences have become too complex to handle. Russia is part of it.
So it seems like a lot of the situations in Africa have a lot of outside, and no, I don't even mean outside influences, as the main thing pushing it.
Sure, America, Russia, and the UAE, for now, are surely implicated in the fact that each one of them has an interest which is diametrically opposed to the other.
China doesn't have an interest?
China is very quiet. China, as a matter of national policy, does not interfere directly into affairs of nations. No. So you cannot even accuse China of any involvement in this respect.
Until
they may wait until the conflict is over. If they have a business relationship, diplomatic relationship to maintain with the country, they do. So even comments, China's foreign policy does not allow them to comment negatively or otherwise on any conflict going on around the world. For them, it is friendship and it ends there. Economic relationship, it ends there. But for political interference, no. And so they are very, very clear, and you can see them. They are not involved around the world in all that is going on, conflict areas. China is not interested because that is what its foreign policy says. Friendship underlines its foreign policy position. Now,
but that friendship, is it really friendship?
It is. It is. In fact, surprisingly, it is the only country you can say, a big power after Russia, that you can clearly say, yes, the foreign policy projections are based on mutual respect and friendship. Because what China has done for some of these countries, no other country has been able to do so. If you take China, generally in Africa, you will see that Africa never had a friend better than the Chinese anywhere. Not at all. Because their infrastructure that China has willingly donated to Africa that cannot be replicated by anyone for now. I mean, you can see the African Union headquarters, the conference facilities, five-star hotel, all built and donated to Africa by China.
Well, is it not, can it be called a Trojan horse of some sort?
No, certainly not. The West has painted it that way in the perceptions of people, just to denigrate China's relationship with Africa. But you see, those things transcend the current moment. China only says Africa was responsible for making it one member of the Security Council of the United Nations. Without African bloc vote, the West blocked China out of the United Nations Security Council. African countries came together, rallied themselves, and said, we must put China there to represent us because we don't have capacity. And so that vote changed the color and composition of the United Nations. And so China has also been very, very happy with that, has never regretted, and has always vowed that it must pay back to Africa that friendship. That underpins the reason for financing the new headquarters of the AU, the hotel, and the conference.
Okay. All right. Now, since we're moving towards economic conversations, let's now get to what's happened economically on the continent this year. We see the situation in Kenya that brought about all those protests. What's your take on that?
Well, the year came around with a lot of, would we say, turmoil, like we said, because now suddenly Kenya opened up the year with protest as a result of tax reform. Tax reform that...
Yeah, tax reform that we're experiencing right now in Nigeria.
Very good. They, you know, at a point in time, the president of Kenya was the only president America knew that was really a president on the African continent. Invited him to Washington, praised him. Meanwhile, by the sidelines, they had brought in IMF, World Bank to say, oh yeah, go and impose all those conditionalities on the country. And the guy accepted, came back home and truly was implementing tax reforms, tax increases, devaluation of the currency. And Kenyans could not take it.
Seems that's a growing trend with IMF and World Bank.
Not growing. It has been a historical position of the IMF, World Bank, that every nation that wants money in a way of loan must comply with these three-track prescriptions. Namely, devalue your currency, initiate tax reform to bring in more money from your citizens and liberalize your economy to a point where you have no control.
So how many of that have we fixed in Nigeria?
Well, we have implemented all. That's what is going on right now. You remember some 2-3 months ago, the World Bank came here. The deputy president of the World Bank came here and said, Nigeria's economic reform is working very well. But that we should be prepared for another 15 years of such reforms for the actual impact of this reform to be felt. People took offense of that kind of statement because can we actually sustain such economic reforms for another 10-15 years? Just to achieve what? This was the same reform, the same group, IMF, World Bank, or the Bretton Woods institutions imposed on Nigeria in 1986 through the Structural Adjustment Program that destroyed the economy. Up to now, we have not recovered. And then someone comes back with the same prescription to a disease that has no relationship with what they are trying to do. And now we are part of it. We are already imposing on ourselves taxes and tax methods and reforms and collecting money rather blindly on anything collectible, which is making the economy very difficult to manage, and then people's livelihood have been destroyed. I mean, if the economy was meant for the country, then let it be meant for the country, and let us move towards seeing livelihoods improve rather than deteriorate. This is the result of what we can see in Ghana, that citizens decided that the same IMF policies were not working, and they had to kick out the government to say we can't take it any longer because we never knew this inflation, we never knew this devaluation, we never knew these new taxes, we never knew such liberalization of the mining sector in Ghana, such that citizens had no right to say anything, because these Bretton Woods institutions will tell you, liberalize. And when you liberalize, having devalued your currency, they find it very easy to come in, because with little quantity of dollars, they buy a large chunk of your economy. Because you have devalued yourself, including the human being, actually, in a way. So they come in and now take literally anything at will for nothing. Why should I devalue my currency? Why? And, you know, our governments, we hope, should be able to stand up to understand some of these nuances and say, because now there is no reason under the sun. 10 years now, more or less, Nigeria has gone through this process of devaluing the currency at regular intervals, and it has not improved the livelihoods of citizens. So if there is a prescription that makes life difficult for citizens, how will that be in the interest of the nation? These are the questions that we need to interrogate, because it can't continue like this.
Okay, so before we go on a break, just let's talk briefly on these foreign tours and bilateral relations that President Bola Tinubu has embarked on in the last few months. How exactly is this going to help Nigeria, and I hope hopefully the African continent by extension?
Well, on the face value, we would say yes, there's need for government to go out there and negotiate bilateral treaties and protocols, conventions with other countries, because we have to trade with other people. However, there's need for caution in some respects, because some of these countries ordinarily, we've said before, some of those agreements might not necessarily be in our own interest. The one with France recently surely cannot be, because we do understand some of the things were to be like purchase of military equipment and the rest of them from France. No, certainly no. It shouldn't have been, because if your neighbors are saying this man is bad, I don't think it is time for you to say, yes,
this man is good.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is the plank. Now with South Africa, president has signed agreements that now makes it possible for Nigerians to travel without visa or less of visa requirements to South Africa.
Okay.
To me and to anybody in the diplomatic circle, it shouldn't be celebrated.
Why not?
Yes, it is something that should have been sine qua non. We don't have to go there and beg South Africa to grant Nigerians free visa or whatsoever. That should have been for a given, because I tell you, without Nigeria, there wouldn't have been a free South Africa.
Oh, okay.
So it's not something we should even beg. It's because Nigeria lost its steam as truly the giant of Africa that we have to come back and beg. No.
A country that we helped come out of the apartheid.
We shouldn't. It's an abuse. It's an abuse of our sovereignty. Now you see, countries utilize their sovereignty as a national economic asset, which Nigeria is not doing. Unfortunately, our foreign affairs had been like asleep for quite a long time. You hardly get to hear Nigeria is this, Nigeria is doing this, or this position. We need to declare positions on certain things around the world. We are not doing so. Now, for anybody to therefore go and say, we're signing maybe business agreements with South Africa, I mean, well, let's take it. Nigerians will benefit from it. The xenophobia should go down, but the government of South Africa must do much more to educate its citizens as to why Nigerians should be treated differently. And the foreign ministry here in Nigeria must stand very firm, very, very firm, and not beg a country like South Africa. It should be a position that we demand, not begging.
Okay. All right, we're going to go on another short break, and when we return, we look at other issues that took place in the continent of Africa in 2024. Just stay with us. Welcome back to Africa Update on Trust Television. Yes, actually, it's a special edition. I didn't say that from the beginning as we were doing a review of what's happening on the African continent. So that's why it's an extended version this episode. Now, let's go to the issue of what happened at the COP29, where, there was this, back and forth. It actually extended beyond the originated timeline for the COP, but the African countries were saying, okay, you have to pay us more for beyond the 100 billion that they were given before, and now they're now asking for $1 trillion. But at the end of the day, they came to 250 billion. Did you think that Africa sold itself properly at that COP29?
Well, it's rather unfortunate that our colonial masters are still in charge and dictating what should happen. Someone utilized our natural resources to develop its own country, and now turns around and says these products have contributed to pollution and inevitably climate change, and is not willing to provide money for cleanup or mitigation. Rather, it can dictate how much it can give towards that end. It's surprising that we have to go cap in hand once more to beg the same people to ameliorate what they have actually done. Some of the African countries don't even have a single functional industry that is contributing to this climate change of a thing. Not one. Almost all the industries are run in Europe and America, and therefore contributing to the climate change whatsoever. Now, here is a time for accountability, and these countries clearly said they are not even willing They are not willing. Because for this negotiation to have dragged on up to the period where they had to walk out, and then you begin to say, okay, let's come back, let's see how to negotiate, let's see how to strike compromises. To us, as Africans, should be a clear indication that the West is still on its own, and therefore, African leaders need to come back home and re-strategize. The amount of 250 million or thereabout,
250
billion, is really nothing. Nothing, absolutely. Because what are you really going to achieve with this money? Second, the way these agreements are crafted, when you say, yes, we are ready, you will hear now from next year, there will be meetings for fine-tuning when this money will be available, in what tranches this money will be available, and what other precedent conditionalities before this money is released. Because it's not as if the money is there, projects that are supposed to be for mitigation are here, let us go ahead and implement. No. There's still a long, long way to go. And even within this period, nobody knows how many years it will take for this money to be realized, and in what context, what quantum, what strategy.
So this money that was talked about is not money that is being given every year?
It is money that is supposed to go, be raised somewhere, somehow. You will require new institutions to be set up to manage all this. So we are still looking forward to protocols, agreements as to the practical application of all this. And believe me, for the next 5 years, you are not going to see any project related to this. There will be plenty of meeting, plenty of coffee drinking, and nothing. Nothing, absolutely. So for us, African leaders should be practical enough to understand that sometimes actually the money we spend in attending these meetings is a waste. Yeah, it's a waste, I tell you. It's a waste. Nothing comes out of it. Nothing. If you go around today and begin to ask questions, for instance, okay, the United Nations spends so much money, time, resources, and what have you for SDGs. Where are the tech homes do we have today that we can go around and say, yes, this was brought by SDG, this project, water, sanitation, road, or something? Where? Or livelihoods, social development, gender, all those things were debated and debated and debated. Now, when it comes to implementation, you see a new protocol emerging from some meetings that you cannot understand. And in each meeting, more money is spent. So at the end of it, you see that they have succeeded in organizing meetings that dovetail into another meeting and another meeting and another meeting, whereas the real matter is left somewhere. And African countries, we need to wise up, because oftentimes when we even take loans, the loans are not on projects. The loans are usually on programs. And these programs are ephemeral. They have no substance. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. The impacts are not there, which is the difference between the West and China. China does not give loans for any program. China gives loans for projects.
Infrastructure.
You will see infrastructure, you will touch it, citizens will use it. So even if we are paying, it will still make sense for us to pay.
Okay.
But not for what the West is generally doing. Sincerely.
Okay.
It's a complete waste of resources and what have you. And for a country like Nigeria, I think we also need to look at it from a national point of view.
Okay.
We are a crude oil producing country. Some of these ideas in the climate change movement, it's not for us.
Yes,
it's against us.
Yes, actually.
It's against us. So
yes.
our president and all other officials need to look at this critically. Do we really need to be there? We are not supposed to.
We could go there, find out how we could come and make our place better for us with the ideas that are being shared there.
Well,
so time is upon us, but just before we go, let's look at the after. The Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement.
Good.
How well do you think that has worked in 2024?
Well, unfortunately, as usual, it's a very big bottomless pit, one can say. It's a good program by design, conceptualization, etc. But implementation, I think it is still a very huge challenge for the African continent because Africa is not trading with itself.
Why is that?
Well, we have both physical, economic, and social barriers that makes trading amongst ourselves very difficult. You cannot have an Africa with over 40 different currencies attempting to trade among itself. Our trade will still need to go to Europe and America because the dollar still remains the exchange rate or value of the currency, whereas we are trading with a neighbor. You still send through SWIFT transfers of money, XYZ, to pay for goods. I mean, Nigerian is buying something from Benin Republic, just nearby. And you need to go to the bank and transfer this money. The money needs to go to Europe. SWIFT needs to clear it. In the process, we are paying SWIFT for that service, right? Losing money. We are paying for custom duties across our borders, all in an effort to say we want to trade. It comes to nothing because we are not actually receiving value for what we should be. We are contiguous countries in Africa. So the AfTA itself, the protocol, looks good on paper. But the implementation, as you can see, has become very problematic because you still try to cross borders and you see difficulties of you need to present your passport, you need to present these, you need to exchange your money here. Anytime you exchange money from your country to another, you lose money. And when you go across, you also lose money, and vice versa. So the cost of these goods becomes a little higher than ordinarily should have been. So the African Union actually needs to do much more, much more. There are needs for protocols to lessen all those things. And that's why even the binational commission that South Africa and Nigeria were trying to establish is to remove some of these handicaps that are still part of the problem. So we cannot say the AfTA protocol has achieved what it is supposed to achieve, but it's a beginning. We wish everyone good.
Okay. And that's the much we have for you this week on Africa Update. I hope you've learned something. It was quite educative and informative, as I promised you in the beginning of the program. Yes, it's an extended version, and that's why it's special edition. That's why it's an extended version. And thank you so much, Ambassador. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for your insights on what's happening on the African continent and beyond.
Thank you, viewers, for having me and the station. We appreciate being here once more to review events on our continent, and let's hope next year becomes better.
Let's hope so. Hopefully, hopefully. That's all we have, hope. And on that note, it's been a pleasure having you with us this beautiful year 2024 on Africa Update. Hope to see you next year with more content to enjoy the festivities. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms for more news, programs, and documentaries. I'm your host, Chiamaka Mwafo. Bye now. Compliments of the season.